June 4th, 1942. Dawn breaks over the Pacific as Admiral Nagumo's carrier strike force cuts through calm waters toward Midway Atoll. Zero fighters warm up on flight decks. Dive bombers load with armor-piercing shells. It's the moment that will decide the fate of the Pacific War. But let's change one thing. Slicing through the depths beneath the Japanese fleet is something that shouldn't exist for another 80 years. A Virginia-class attack submarine from 2024, complete with nuclear power and weapons that can sink ships from hundreds of miles away. So what happens when the ocean's most lethal predator materializes in the middle of history's most decisive naval battle? Can it single-handedly rewrite the Pacific War? Or is even advanced technology no match for an entire enemy fleet? Meet the USS Virginia, SSN 774. This isn't your grandfather's submarine from World War II. We're talking about a 377-foot underwater missile platform that displaces 7,800 tons when submerged. 4 massive torpedo tubes sit ready to fire Mark 48 ADCAP torpedoes, each one guided by wire and capable of tracking targets with sonar that makes enemy ships sound like freight trains in the night. But that's just the beginning. Hidden behind her sail are 12 vertical launch system tubes, each one loaded with Tomahawk cruise missiles that can strike targets over 1,000 miles away with pinpoint accuracy. The brain of this beast is a sonar suite, so advanced it can hear a wrench drop on a ship's deck from 20 miles underwater. The ANBQQ-10 sonar system processes sound signatures in real time, identifying not just where enemy ships are, but what type they are and how fast they're moving. In 1942, that's basically having supernatural hearing in a world of the deaf. Now let's look at what's waiting on the surface. Admiral Nagumo commands 4 of Japan's finest aircraft carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. These floating airfields carry over 250 aircraft between them, including the legendary Mitsubishi Zero fighters that have dominated Pacific skies for months. Each carrier displaces around 30,000 tons and bristles with anti-aircraft guns. Supporting them are 2 battleships, Haruna and Kirishima, armed with 14-inch naval rifles that can punch through steel like paper. 3 heavy cruisers and 11 destroyers complete the formation, all crewed by battle-hardened sailors who've been perfecting their craft since the attack on Pearl Harbor. But here's what makes this matchup fascinating. In 1942, anti-submarine warfare barely exists. Japanese destroyers carry depth charges, sure, but they're designed for the diesel submarines of the era, boats that had to surface regularly and made noise you could hear for miles. They have no concept of nuclear-powered vessels that can stay submerged for months or move at speeds that match surface ships. 3:15 a.m., 200 miles northwest of Midway. The Virginia's sonar operator picks up the distant rumble of propellers, dozens of them moving in a formation through the pre-dawn darkness. On screens that glow with digital precision, the Japanese fleet appears as clear as daylight. Every ship is cataloged, tracked, and assigned a threat priority before Admiral Nagumo even knows American forces are in the area. The submarine's captain doesn't hesitate. At this range, with these weapons, it's not a battle, it's target practice. The first Tomahawk missile punches through the ocean surface at 4:22 a.m. followed by another, then another. 11 cruise missiles streaked toward the Japanese fleet at 550 miles per hour, skimming just 50 feet above the waves. No lookout in 1942 has ever seen anything like them. Aboard the flagship Akagi, Admiral Nagamo reviews final preparations for the morning's airstrike when his world explodes. The first tomahawk slams into the carrier's island superstructure, obliterating the command center in a fireball that lights up the pre-dawn sky. Secondary explosions ripple through the ship as aviation fuel ignites, turning Japan's premier aircraft carrier into a floating inferno. Kaga takes 2 hits amidships, right where her aircraft are being fueled and armed for the morning strike. The explosion is so massive it can be seen from 40 miles away. Within minutes, the carrier that helped devastate Pearl Harbor is listing heavily to starboard, her flight deck a twisted ruin of burning metal. But the Virginia isn't finished. From her position 12 miles below the surface, she's already calculating firing solutions for her torpedoes. The Mark 48s don't just explode on contact, they're programmed to detonate beneath enemy hulls, breaking the ship's backs with the force of the water displacement. The heavy cruiser tone, desperately trying to coordinate a response to an enemy they can't see or understand, suddenly lurches as a torpedo finds its mark below the waterline. The massive warship splits apart like a broken toy, her hull cracking from the sheer force of the underwater detonation. Within seconds, the pride of the Imperial Navy's cruiser force disappears beneath the waves, taking 500 sailors with her. Chaos erupts across the Japanese formation. Ships scatter in all directions, their crews screaming reports of submarines, mines, or some kind of invisible enemy bomber. Radio channels flood with panicked voices trying to make sense of explosions that seem to come from nowhere. In the pre-dawn darkness, officers peer through binoculars at empty horizons, searching for an enemy that fights from beneath the surface. The destroyer Arashi races toward the last known position of the torpedo attack, her crew manning depth charge racks with weapons designed for a completely different kind of warfare. But the Virginia has already moved, gliding silently through the depths at 25 knots, a speed that would be impossible for any diesel submarine of the era. Her nuclear reactor hums quietly, providing unlimited underwater endurance while Japanese sonar operators strain to hear the distinctive sound of electric motors that will never come. Meanwhile, 150 miles to the southeast, the American task force under Admiral Fletcher has no idea their enemy is being systematically destroyed by forces they can't comprehend. The carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown launch their morning scout planes right on schedule, searching for a Japanese fleet that's already burning. Back at the battle scene, the Virginia surfaces her periscope just long enough to assess the damage. Through advanced optics that can see clearly in near darkness, the submarine's crew watches the Soryu listing heavily to port, her flight deck buckled and twisted from internal explosions. The carrier Hiryu, the sole survivor of the initial missile strike, desperately launches every aircraft she can get airborne, but her pilots have no target to attack. The submarine captain makes a calculated decision. Rather than finish off the burning carriers, he turns his attention to the escorts. The battleship Kirishima, her massive 14-inch guns trained uselessly toward the empty horizon, becomes the next target. 2. Mark 48 torpedoes streak through the water at 45 knots, their wire guidance systems allowing for course corrections that make evasion impossible. The first torpedo detonates directly beneath the battleship's magazine. The explosion lifts the entire forward section of the ship out of the water before slamming it back down in a shower of twisted steel and burning debris. The second torpedo finds the engine room, and the 32,000-ton warship that once seemed invincible begins her final dive toward the ocean floor. Japanese destroyer captains, trained in the art of night fighting and close-quarters combat, find themselves completely helpless against an enemy they can't locate or even understand. Their depth charges, designed to sink submarines that operate at shallow depths, explode harmlessly hundreds of feet above the Virginia as she cruises at 400 feet below the surface. By sunrise, when American dive bombers would have been searching for targets, the Battle of Midway is already over. 4 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, and 3 cruisers rest on the ocean floor. The remaining Japanese destroyers, low on fuel and completely demoralized, begin their retreat toward home waters. But the Virginia's mission is just beginning. With her missile tubes empty but her torpedo room still loaded, she sets course for the Marshall Islands, where Japanese supply convoys keep the Pacific war machine running. Her sonar picks up the distinctive sound of merchant vessels, tankers loaded with precious fuel, and transport ships carrying troops and equipment to forward bases. The submarine doesn't need to surface, doesn't need to worry about air cover or escort vessels. In 1942, convoy protection focuses on threats from the sky and surface raiders. Nobody is prepared for an underwater predator that can strike from miles away and disappear without a trace. One by one, supply ships vanish in the middle of the Pacific. Their SOS signals speak of mysterious explosions, of ships that simply break apart and sink without warning. Japanese naval intelligence struggles to piece together reports that make no sense according to everything they know about submarine warfare. The psychological impact spreads faster than the actual attacks. Merchant captains refuse to sail without massive escorts. Supply schedules collapse as ships huddle in protected harbors. The carefully orchestrated Japanese advance across the Pacific grinds to a halt as resources that should be flowing to frontline bases instead sit uselessly in port. So could one Virginia-class submarine have changed the outcome of Midway? Absolutely. The Japanese carrier force that dominated the Pacific for 6 months would have been obliterated before their pilots even reached their cockpits. But here's the thing. It wouldn't just change one battle. The ripple effects would reshape the entire Pacific War. Without those carriers, Japan loses its ability to project power across vast ocean distances. Their island-hopping strategy collapses. Supply lines that kept their empire running get severed one torpedo at a time. The Virginia proves that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't the biggest or the loudest. It's the one your enemy never sees coming. In a world of battleships and aircraft carriers slugging it out on the surface, the real predator lurked beneath the waves, rewriting the rules of naval warfare 80 years ahead of schedule. But that raises another question. What happens when a modern aircraft carrier faces off against the entire German U-boat fleet? That's a story for another time.